Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the deep woods for a collection of scary stories. But before we begin, I'd like to wish a very happy birthday to Fear Hagen. I hope you've had a wonderful day. I also have the privilege of being joined once again by the incredible Papa Scare. If you enjoy his work, feel free to check out the link in the description or at the end of the video. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I've had a few too many encounters with creepy men in my life. My friends like to joke that I'm a weirdo magnet, and honestly they're not wrong. I've gotten more street smart with age, but when I was younger, especially as a teen, I was painfully naive. This story happened when I was 20, and it makes my skin crawl whenever I think of it. At the time, my mum, my little sister and I had just moved from a small village in the Shires to a more affluent town down south. It was a big but welcome change. I had been going through a tough time mentally, and the fresh start felt like something I desperately needed. The town itself was beautiful, picturesque even, but finding a job was a nightmare. I was frustrated and felt like I wasn't pulling my weight at home, especially since Mum needed help with the bills. That's when Phil entered the picture. Phil was a middle-aged guy who ran a local takeaway in town. Over the course of a few months, we'd gotten friendly with him. He'd often spot us out shopping, come over for a chat, and ask how the family was doing. He seemed like a kind and caring guy genuinely, so when he mentioned he might have a job for me in his shop, plus a flat upstairs I could rent for next to nothing, I was thrilled. It felt like things were finally falling into place. Phil got our address and said he'd stop by one evening after closing up, and he'd drive me over to see the flat. It was supposed to be a quick trip, half an hour tops. I didn't even bring my phone, which was a rookie mistake, but I had no credit at the time, and figured I wouldn't need it for such a short ride. Phil knocked at around 8 PM and my mum answered, and he told her that he'd have me back in no time. I got in the car feeling hopeful. I was dressed casual but neat, thinking now was my chance to show I'm responsible, mature and job ready. It was already dark, as it was March, and we started driving. And that's when I noticed something odd right away. We weren't heading towards town. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was taking some shortcut I didn't know about. He was a local after all. But within a minute it was clear we were going in the opposite direction. The roads got darker. Trees thickened on the other side. No street lights, no houses, just forest. And I asked, "Where are we going? Town's the other way." He says all cheerful, "Just thought I'd take you on a little tour. There are beautiful forests and peaceful spots round here I'd love to show you." My stomach dropped. I was trying to stay calm, reasoning that maybe he was just a bit odd. Maybe he was genuinely proud of the scenery, but another voice in my head was screaming, "Why now in the dark alone?" We kept driving. I stared out the window, scanning for landmarks, anything I could use to recognize where we were in case I had to run. Ditches, tree lines, fences, street signs. My eyes were working overtime. Meanwhile, Phil kept chatting away about the job, about his friendly staff, like we were on some casual drive. Then he slowed down and turned onto a narrow dirt road, a muddy track with thick trees on one side and pitch-black fields on the other. And that's when full-blown panic set in. My stomach twisted. I actually thought I might throw up, and I knew something bad was about to happen, but I didn't move. I sat frozen in the passenger seat, buckled in, trying to stay composed. If I jumped out, I'd be running across a muddy field into nowhere. But if I stayed... He pulled the car into a small empty clearing, a sort of unofficial car park. There was only one other car there, steamed up with two silhouettes inside, it very obvious what they were doing. Phil turned to me and put his hand on my knee. "We should do what they're doing." Just like that, straight-faced. I made this weird high-pitched laugh/whimper. Something between fear and disbelief. It came out all wrong, like I'd swallowed a marble. But apparently that freaked him out because he looked genuinely thrown off by my reaction. Internally, I was giving myself a mental high five for being such an awkward goblin in a moment of danger, but he kept going. It'll be fun. No one will see us. No, I said quickly. I'm kind of seeing someone anyway. He smiled a creepy patient smile, like he thought I'd eventually cave. I tried again. Mum will be expecting me back any minute. I'm sure she won't mind you staying a bit longer. You can trust me, you know. That's when I pulled my leg out from under his hand, looked at him straight in the face and said firmly, Take me home, now. Something must have shifted in my voice because without a word he put the car in gear and drove. The entire ride back, my hand hovered over the seatbelt button. I was ready to bolt if he so much as slowed down. When we finally pulled up to our house, I was out of the car before it had fully stopped. Slamming the door behind me, it headed straight towards the little rope fence around our front garden. That's when I heard him get out too. I think I'll pop in and say hi to your mum, he said with a smirk. My heart dropped. I knew exactly what he was trying to do, either scare me into silence or beat me to the punchline so he could spin his own version of events. But Mum had already heard the car and opened the front door. I barged past her without a word and ran straight for the kitchen, grabbed a small knife from the drawer, and flew into my sister's room. Don't leave this room no matter what you hear, I whispered back, and shoved the knife up my sleeve. She looked at me wide-eyed. Okay? I went back to the living room and Phil was already sitting on our sofa, casual as anything like he owned the place. Mum looked a bit puzzled, but hadn't clocked anything yet. I perched awkwardly on the arm of the sofa next to her, as far away from him as possible, trying to keep the knife hidden. Phil smiled. Why don't you come on over here and sit next to me? No, I'm fine, thanks. Come on, I don't bite, he laughed, patting the seat beside me. I said I'm fine. My teeth were clenched. Mum was watching the back and forth like a tennis match. Something in my behavior clearly sent her the signal. I must have looked wild, half perched, half crouching, twitching with panic, and staring at her like I was trying to telepathically scream for help. Mum finally said, It's getting late now. I think you should go. Phil stood up, muttered something about needing to check on the shop, but as he walked past me, he paused and offered me his hand to shake. The weirdest part of the night, honestly. But I saw an opportunity. I extended the hand that held the knife, and when he gripped it, I didn't stab, just jabbed the tip into his palm, not enough to cut, but enough to feel, and he yanked his hand back, looked down and saw the blade, and then looked at me. I stared back at him with absolute disgust. He left immediately, didn't say a word, just walked out the door and vanished into the night, and I told Mum everything. She was livid. We talked about going to the police, but technically he hadn't done anything that could have been reported, just creeped me out to the extreme. The worst part? When I mentioned it to a few girls on our street, they both went dead silent, shot each other a weird look and changed the subject. I got the feeling I wasn't the first. We moved not long after and I never saw him again, and I'm glad I don't have to. So to Kebab Phil and your filthy little forest tour, let's never meet again. This happened 3 years ago, during the second week of deer opener in Amaji State Park, Minnesota. If you know that land, you'll know it's brutal. Swamps, thick fog, endless wetland and sinkholes. You go in unprepared, without marking your path, and you might never come out. People disappear out there, and it's not an exaggeration. My story begins in the early morning, with fog hanging heavy like wet sheets. I was alone, moving slow with my rifle slung across my chest, both hands on the scope. I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead of me, and was trying to find high ground where I could actually get a shot at something, or at least see something. The further I hiked, the quieter it became. No birds, no breeze, just the squelch of my boots and breath. Then I realized I was lost. The moment that hits you in a place like that, it's a special kind of panic. One that spreads up your spine and goes through your ribs. But I kept moving though, trying to orient myself, hoping for a break in the fog, anything that looked familiar. I took one step too far. It was instant. The earth gave out, and I dropped straight down. There was no warning, and there was no time to react. I was up to my neck before I even registered what had happened. Just thick, cold mud swallowing me alive. The only thing keeping me from going under was my rifle. Thank God I had it across my chest, the bottom barrel wedged just wide enough to keep me suspended at the rim of the hole. I screamed. I thrashed. I tried pulling up with everything I had, but every moment made me sink deeper. I was in a goddamn sinkhole, chest deep in freezing sludge, in the middle of one of the most unforgiving forests in the state. And no one knew I was there. I fought for hours. I don't know exactly how long, 4, perhaps 5, screaming my lungs raw, kicking, pulling, and every time I lifted myself up a little, the rifle would sink down a little more. I'd manage a breath, then sink again. The mud got in my ears, under my eyelids, and between my teeth. My muscles were shaking. I was soaked, shivering, and I could feel my body start to shut down. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where I die. What really broke me, though, was the thought of my wife and mum never knowing what happened. I imagined them holding on to hope for years, not knowing I was just gone. I thought about my 2 daughters, how I wouldn't be there to walk them down the aisle, teach them to drive, see who they'd grow into. All of that gone because I went on a careless hunting trip. Eventually, I stopped screaming. Something cracked inside me and I went quiet. My body was done. I couldn't feel my legs. My hands were locked in a death grip on that rifle, my only lifeline. And I hung there, sobbing into the mud and waiting. That's when the strangest thing happened. It wasn't a noise or a light or anything like that. It was a feeling, a rush of euphoria that hit me like a wave. I went from panic and despair to this weird calm sadness, like I was accepting it, like I was okay with it. I remember actually thinking, all right, it's my time. And then I swear to God, I felt hands grab mine. 2 pairs, human hands, real and solid. They gripped me tight, mud, blood and all, and started pulling. Turns out, a father and son had shot a deer and tracked the blood trail to within 5 feet of where I'd sunk. The deer must have run past the sinkhole before collapsing, and they were following the trail blind through the fog. They weren't shouting, weren't stomping. If they'd been 5 feet to either side, they'd have missed me entirely. Where that deer died, I was pulled back into the world. They dragged me out half dead, covered in filth. My rifle warped and ruined, but still in my grip. I spent the next week in hospital recovering from hypothermia, dehydration, and a level of exhaustion I can't even begin to describe. I looked like hell, could barely talk, could barely sleep. I still don't know really. I'll wake up sweating and screaming, dreaming that I'm sinking again, that the mud's in my mouth and I can't breathe. And every time I do, I get out of bed and check on my girls. Now I have 3. I watch them sleep. And I think, whatever force gave me a second chance. I haven't hunted since. I haven't even stepped foot into the deep woods, not even close. I don't know if I ever will. Just thinking about it makes me tremble. Even sharing this has me in tears. The mud, the cold, the hands, it never leaves me. One more thing though. Last year during hunting season, a man from the Twin Cities vanished in that same area. They searched for weeks and never found him. Every time I saw his face on the news, I could picture him struggling like I had, clawing for the surface with no one there to help. I was lucky I had my rifle across my chest. I had that deer and I had those hands. But not everyone does. This happened about 15 years ago, back when I was a kid living in a rural part of Mexico. I never told this story before, at least not the full version, because for a long time, I didn't understand fully what we saw. But as I've gotten older and looked back on it, I've realized just how dangerous that day could have been for me, my dad, and everyone else who was there. And to this day, I haven't had the guts to bring it up with him. It happened somewhere deep in the woods outside of our small town. My dad had a few friends with him that day, older rancher types, men he trusted, and we were all out along this dirt road collecting firewood. This was the kind of road that doesn't really go anywhere anymore, just a rutted trail cut through the shrubs and brush, mostly used by ranchers herding cattle, or locals going off-the-grid hunting. And no one ever came out there, this far anyway, unless they had a very specific reason. I was 11 at the time, and just tagging along to help. We were filling up the bed of my dad's truck with big fallen branches, working quickly because the light was starting to fade. About 10 minutes in, we heard a vehicle approaching, unusual enough that everyone stopped what they were doing to look. From around the bend came this immaculate black pickup truck, completely out of place on that road, a big new model with dark tinted windows and no plates that I could see. It rolled towards us slowly and stopped about 25 feet in front of my dad's truck. No one got out. The truck just sat there, engine idling. I remember noticing the sound first, muffled crying coming from inside the cab. I think it was a woman, but I wasn't sure at the time. It was just the sound of someone sobbing. At that age, I didn't register how strange it was. I just went back to picking up branches, but the grown men around me didn't. The mood had shifted. The older guys froze, and I remember my dad saying something like, "That's enough for today. Let's go." Suddenly everyone was moving fast, throwing the rest of the branches in the truck without even stacking them. My dad was yelling at me to get in. I wasn't moving fast enough and got my hand caught in the door, smashed my thumb hard enough to bleed, but no one really stopped to check me out. My dad just reached across, opened the door, pulled me in and floored it. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought he was just mad, or that maybe he saw something I didn't. I remember him driving faster than I'd ever seen him drive on that road, the truck bouncing and sliding around corners. The adults were murmuring in low voices, worried, clipped tones, but they didn't explain anything to me. It was just grown-up talk. I sat there just holding my busted finger, tuning it out. When we got home, my dad went straight for a few beers. He and the other men sat outside on the patio smoking and talking, the way they always did after something serious. I remember catching pieces of their conversation through the window, words like "malos," "pobrecita," and "ojalá no vieron nada." It meant nothing to me then. Years went by and I never really thought about it, until I got into my early 20s. I don't know why that day came back to me so clearly all of a sudden. But I sat there one night thinking about it, and this heavy realization hit me all at once. We weren't supposed to see that truck, nor hear the crying. Whoever was inside that vehicle, whatever was going on there, wasn't meant for witnesses. And we were lucky, so lucky, that nothing happened to us. I don't know for certain who those people were, but in that part of Mexico, especially back then, you didn't need to ask. If a new truck with blacked out windows and no plates shows up somewhere it doesn't belong, and someone inside is crying, you already know what's going on. Back then, crime in our area wasn't something you saw, it was something you whispered about. Cartel violence existed, but it was quiet, targeted in between them, not something normal people ran into. You didn't find random shootouts or kidnappings in daylight like you might now in some places. So for something like that to happen, out there, so far from town with no one around, it couldn't have been random. I think about my dad a lot when I remember that day, about what must have gone through his head the moment he saw the truck. He had his 10-year-old kid with him. He had friends who had family, and in that one moment he had to decide whether we were in danger, whether whatever was going on in that truck was going to involve us too. He didn't wait to find out, and I think that's what saved us. The more I look back on it, the more terrifying it becomes. Whoever they were, they let us go. Because if they hadn't, there would have been no one around to help. No cell service, no houses, no way out but that road. I think my dad knew that. All the men knew it too. That's why they moved so fast. That's why they didn't let me ask questions. And that's why my dad got drunk that night and never spoke of it again. I haven't brought it up to him since. And I don't think I ever will.
This story takes place in November of 2022. At the time, I drew a special elk tag in the Beaverhead mountain range of central/east Idaho. I had hunted in this area many times before over the years, and I know the area like the back of my hand. It became a place of comfort and good memories. It still is, but I haven't looked at it the same since the story I am about to tell. I planned for a week-long trip for the first week of November and took one of my best friends with me. We spent the first 4 days hiking up and down various ridges, chasing elk and having a blast. The nights were spent storytelling and eating soup by the stove. Mind you, it was November in Idaho, so it was very cold. It was the 4th night of the trip. It had snowed during the day, and a fresh layer of snow lay on the ground. The sky had since cleared up, and a very cold, but still and quiet air had settled in. My friend and I had gotten into a deep discussion about the Bible, spirits, cryptids, skinwalkers, etc. I should note that my friend had at the time experienced a decline in his mental health, and it was not uncommon for him to sometimes behave erratically. This will be relevant later in the story. During this conversation, I felt an intense fear kind of settled on me. It almost felt like the air had become tense. I had the urge to change the discussion into something else, but that's when it happened. Within 20 or 30 yards of the tent, what I thought at first was a coyote began yipping and barking very, very loudly. I looked at my friend, who became excited and told me to grab my gun so we could go look for this thing. It was strange though, and something didn't feel right. The animal, whatever it was, didn't exactly sound like a coyote. It almost shrieked as opposed to yipping the way coyotes do. And it would occasionally bark, and at times almost scream. I'm also an experienced outdoorsman, and any other hunter knows a coyote would not approach a tent in the middle of nowhere and draw attention to itself. It would continue to vocalize for about 3 to 5 minutes at a time, circling the tent from a distance. I reluctantly grabbed my rifle and my spotlight, a very bright, intense flashlight, and started looking for this thing. As I stepped about 10 yards away from the tent, I heard it again, directly in front of me, shrieking, barking, etc. I shined my light directly at it. I could see probably 150 to 200 yards in front of me, yet nothing was there. No eyes shining in the light, no outline of an animal or person, nothing. After repeating this same scenario 3 or 4 times, we gave up and went back in the tent to warm up. But the sound wouldn't stop. At one point, when it went silent, my friend poked his head out of the tent and yelled, "Hey, shut up!" He was immediately answered with a scream from the animal. At times, it sounded like it came from above the tent in the tree we were camped under. I tried playing it off as a coyote or maybe a hunting dog that got lost, but I could not convince myself that it was either of those, and we ignored it for the rest of the time. It slowly started getting further and further away from the tent until it finally stopped about an hour or so later. The next morning, I looked around the area for tracks, yet, to my surprise, I found nothing but our own. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the trip, and a few days later, we went home. Now, I don't know if it is all related, but about 3 months after this, my friend had a complete mental breakdown and has since never been on a hunting trip. Some of his family, a deeply religious family, questioned whether he was a victim of some spiritual attack or something of that nature. I didn't correlate the two at the time, but in hindsight, I have so many questions about that night. Is it a coincidence? Whatever that animal was appeared during that particular conversation? Could it have actually been a coyote or wolf? Why couldn't I see any eyes gleaming with the flashlight? Did this incident have something to do with my friend's mental decline? My friend would sometimes tell me and others about strange things he saw or heard. Was this related? If anyone has anything to point out, please share.
This happened in the summer of 2005, when I was 14. To start, I grew up in a quiet village just outside of Munich in southern Germany. It was a place where people didn't lock their doors at night, and you pretty much knew everyone by name. My parents' house was right on the edge of a nature conservation area, about 2 or 3 square kilometers of thick forest, little ponds and overgrown meadows. It wasn't fenced off or anything, but it wasn't exactly developed for hiking either. There were no trails cutting deep into it, just wild vegetation. Even as a kid, I was drawn to places that felt forgotten or untouched. When I was about 9, I wandered deep into the woods and stumbled across this little clearing tucked away in the trees. It was like something out of a dream. Just a patch of tall wildflowers and soft grass in the middle of nowhere. The sun filtered in through the canopy just right. Then it was completely silent, except for insects buzzing and the occasional rustle of leaves. I remember standing there for a while, like I'd found a secret only I was supposed to know, and that place became my spot. Over the next few years, I went there whenever I wanted to be alone. I'd bring books, sometimes a sketch pad, and when I got older I'd sunbathe. I never once saw another person there, not a footprint, not a candy wrapper, nothing. So I never told anyone about it. I'd leave my bike hidden near the edge of the woods, take a weird winding route I memorized by instinct, and lie in the grass for hours. I felt safer there than anywhere else, until this one specific day. It was midsummer, hot and still. I biked out in the early afternoon with a book and a towel in my bag. At some point I must have fallen asleep lying in the sun, and when I woke up, everything felt off. I rolled on my side and nearly screamed. There was a man sitting less than 2 meters away from me, and I froze. He looked to be in his 50s, average build with graying hair tucked under a cap, and he was wearing this light outdoor gear, the kind that hikers wear, and around his neck, a camera. A real one, not a phone, a DSLR. I panicked. I'd been sunbathing topless, something I only felt safe doing because it was so secluded. My bikini top and shirt were draped over a bush just out of arm's reach. I instinctively curled up trying to cover myself, pressing myself flat against the ground, heart hammering. But the man didn't flinch. He just sat there watching me. "You're beautiful. I'm so glad I get to see you again." That word, again, made my stomach turn. I'd never seen this man before. I tried to stay calm and asked him to turn around so I could get dressed. "No need to be ashamed. I just want a little chat." He started talking like casual conversation, asking where I lived, what school I went to, and if I had a boyfriend. Every time I answered, short and hesitant, he tried to pull more out of me. I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed by this surreal mix of fear and disbelief. He wasn't threatening in an overt way, not yet. It was just too comfortable, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Then he asked if he could take more pictures of me. His exact words were something like, "You look like a nymph. I'd love to preserve you forever." I said no, and that's when his tone changed. His smile dropped and his voice went flat and cold. I still remember, even though I wish I didn't. "You're really stupid for a naked little girl all alone in the forest." Something about the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, made my blood run cold. Like he wasn't threatening me. He was just pointing out how easy it would be, like it was obvious. I don't remember making the decision to run. I bolted barefoot, half-dressed, branches tearing into my skin. I didn't look back. I just ran until I couldn't hear his voice or his laughter. I kept low crouching in the brush, listening for footsteps, but nothing came. Eventually I circled back to the meadow, nearly 2 hours later, and he was gone. Most of my things were still there, except for my shirt and my bikini top. I threw on my skirt, grabbed my stuff, and sprinted back home. I didn't tell my parents, I don't even know why. Maybe I was embarrassed. Maybe I didn't want to explain what I had been doing out there or why I'd been undressed. My secret place, the one spot in the world that I had felt was completely mine, was ruined. The safety, the innocence, the magic of it gone in an instant. And the worst part was I had no idea how long the man had been watching me for. Days, weeks, or longer. Sometimes I still wonder if he took the pictures without me knowing. If somewhere buried on a hard drive on the internet, there were these images of me. I try not to think about it. But to the man who ruined my secret place, I hope we never meet again.
I've always loved the quiet solitude of my small cabin, nestled deep in the woods of northern Michigan. The towering pines and silent lakes create a vast, serene world, away from bustling city life. It's the kind of place where you can almost hear your own thoughts echoing back at you. The wildlife is just as you'd expect in these parts. Deer, bears, and coyotes roam freely, living their lives on the periphery of mine. I often sit on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the deer graze in the clearing. They're majestic creatures, moving with a grace that seems almost unnatural. There's a particular group that regularly visits, about 5 or 6 of them. And there was always one in particular that caught my interest. It stood a little apart. Its gaze always seemed to linger on the cabin longer than the others. One foggy morning as dawn broke over the trees, I heard a commotion from the woods. It was the sound of deer, but something was off. I stepped out onto the porch to see the deer standing in the clearing. But that one deer, its eyes were locked onto mine. This time, its stance was different, almost human-like in its deliberation. It was uncanny, like it understood more than it should. As I stared back, time seemed to slow. It began to move, not in the bounding leaps of a startled animal, but in a slow, deliberate stride, its hooves barely making a sound on the ground. I felt a shiver run down my spine as it came closer, its gaze never breaking. Unease washed over me, a primal fear I couldn't explain. I stepped back inside, shut the door, and watched it through the window. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, standing still as if waiting. Then, in an instant, the forest erupted with sounds. Birds took flight, squirrels scattered, and for a moment, it was chaos. When I looked back, the deer was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. That night, I heard the forest alive with unfamiliar sounds. The underbrush rustled as if something was moving through it with purpose. Something more than an animal. Sleep was elusive, and I felt as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to unfold. I haven't seen that particular deer since then. The visits from the deer have become less frequent. After that weird encounter, I still get a little jumpy whenever I'm close to the woods.
This happened in Georgia, around 2012. I was 14 at the time. I'm not a hunter or anything like that, but my cousin invited me and my younger brother to go check out a piece of land his friend's family had just bought. The idea was to fish a bit, hang out and explore the property. Nothing serious. The land was a few acres tucked behind a large suburban neighborhood. You wouldn't even know it was there unless someone showed you. Just a small dirt path branching off from the curb and at the end of a cul-de-sac. You drive over a narrow stretch by a lake, curve around a bend, and then hit a long straight dirt road that ran maybe a mile through dense wood. At the very end, past all the trees, there was a bigger lake that they wanted to eventually stock and fish in. We took a golf cart out there since no one wanted to walk, and honestly it was kind of fun at first. It was me, my brother and my cousin, none of us older than 16. My cousin was driving. We bumped along the path, crossed the water, rounded the curve, and that's when we saw him. Dead ahead, half a mile down the straight stretch of trail, a man walking towards us, alone. No bike, no car, no fishing gear. Just wearing a dark jacket and a full ski mask, walking right down the center of the path. We all went silent and my cousin hit the brakes. The man wasn't running, wasn't yelling, wasn't even reacting to us. Just taking it slow. I remember this very vividly. We were too far to make out his features, but close enough to see the mask. The black ski mask that he wore tight to his face. The kind of thing you'd wear to rob a gas station, and it was summer as well, so there was no reason for him to be wearing anything like that out there. There were no other houses, no trails that connected to this one. Just thick Georgia wood pressing in from both sides, and the path was too narrow to turn around. My cousin whispered, "What the hell?" and shifted the golf cart in reverse. Those little electric carts can make the most obnoxious high-pitched beeping when you back them up, and this one was no exception. So now we're slowly crawling backwards down this trail, tires kicking up dust while this man keeps coming. We were losing it. He was too far to chase us, sure, but something about the way he moved felt wrong, like he knew we were trapped and wanted us to know it. That calm, slow, purposeful walk, like he enjoyed how stuck we were. The quarter-mile reverse felt like forever. Eventually we made it back across the first lake and onto the edge of the neighborhood, hearts pounding. We didn't talk much, just jumped off the cart and ran back to my cousin's house. We told his parents what we saw. I expected them to brush it off, but they took it seriously right away. His dad and a few others grabbed their gear, rifles, flashlights, and 2 trail cams they called plot watchers. They drove out to the property immediately. They searched the whole stretch of trail, checked the woods on both sides, even swept around the bigger lake and the back of the property, but there were no footprints and no broken brush. No one. They left the trail camera set up just in case. Weeks passed. Nothing showed up, not on camera, not during hunting trips, not even a random person walking through. And the thing is, they still use the land all the time, hunting, fishing, and camping. And no one has ever seen anything like that since. But I think about it constantly. What was he doing out there? Wearing that ski mask in the heat? Where did he come from? And where the hell did he go? There was nowhere for him to disappear to that quickly, not with how deep and overgrown the woods were. No car, no path, no sign he ever existed. I don't know if it was just some weirdo trying to scare us off or something worse. All I know is I'd rather never meet him again.
So, I live in the southwest of the UK. Years ago, when I was 17, this would be about 15 years ago, I got kicked out by my mum, who I was living with, because we had an argument. I wandered the streets that night, trying to stay awake. I asked my friends if I could stay with them, but That wasn't an option, unfortunately. At the time, I lived in a relatively new suburban area, so I decided to walk into the nearby woods that overlooked some farmland, hoping to watch the stars and find a place to sleep. This was around 2 a.m. There was a large wooded area near some flats, and I crawled through a thicket, which led to an open space. As I walked through, it was pitch black, and I thought this would be a nice, safe area to try and sleep. As I laid down, suddenly, I heard footsteps. They sounded heavy and loud, and it sounded like they were circling me. I froze and asked if anyone was there. The footsteps got faster and faster, pacing around me. Then, I heard a deep growl. It sounded big. I panicked and ran away, through the thicket and onto the street. At the time, I had about £100 in my bank account, so I wandered to a nearby hotel to see if I could get a room, but they would not let me in. I was cold, desperate and scared, so I walked to a nearby 24-hour shop, bought some snacks, a torch, flashlight for you Americans, and made my way back to the thicket. This time, I was armed with a light. When I returned to the woods, I heard the footsteps again. I quickly turned on the torch, shining it all around, looking for where the footsteps were coming from, but I couldn't see anything. Then, I heard the growl again. It was deep and reverberating. It sounded like it was right next to me. I could hear it, but not see it, but it sounded big. No matter how much I shone the torch, I could not see what was making the noise. I ran away to a nearby bus stop and spent the night there, awake but scared. The next day I met up with a friend and told her what happened. I wanted to investigate, so me and her went to go through the thicket into this open space. She was scared after the story I told her, but it was broad daylight. I went in again, and she stayed outside. I heard the growl again, really loud and really close. It was daylight though. I could hear it, but not see it. I know this sounds made up, but please believe me. It scares the hell out of me, and no one believes what I witnessed. If anyone has any similar stories, please let me know.
This happened about 2 years ago, in a dense forest not far from where I live. I was in my early 20s at the time. A couple of friends and I had decided to do something dumb and cliché. Drive out to the woods at night to scare ourselves. The plan was to take the old logging trail that cuts through the woods, park somewhere off to the side, and walk a bit under the moonlight. We were just bored and looking to push ourselves, maybe get a story out of it. There were 5 of us in total, 2 guys in the back, 1 girl up front, and another friend crammed in the middle. I was driving. The trail was paved with hard-packed gravel, wide enough for a truck but rarely used. It's hemmed in on both sides by tall pines. The canopy there is thick, and once you're in, your headlights are the only thing really letting you see anything. We were talking, joking, normal stuff, and then it just stopped. I didn't even notice at first. One moment everyone was chatting about something dumb, like the kind of things people say when they're trying to be tough or make light of the situation, and next it was dead quiet. I remember asking what was wrong, because the change felt immediate. There was no laughter, no murmurs, not even the gravel crunching beneath the tires. Someone said, "I feel weird," and then another echoed the same thing, like something bad was about to happen. Now I've heard people say things like that before, but this didn't feel like nerves or paranoia. It felt like the whole forest had suddenly stopped breathing. I slowed down a bit, just coasting. And that's when I saw it. Right at the edge of where my headlights faded into darkness, maybe 30 to 40 feet ahead, something ran across the trail, from left to right, really fast. But the thing is, it wasn't human, and I say that with complete confidence. It did not move like a person. It didn't even look like one. It was shaped roughly like a person, but wrong. Tall, lanky, with long arms or something trailing behind it. But its movement was off, too fluid, almost like it glided across instead of running. The best way I can describe it is like a shadow moving across water. There one moment, gone the next with no sound. It didn't even disturb the brush or leaves. I stopped the car in the middle of the trail, heart pounding, eyes glued to the darkness where it disappeared. "I just saw something. Did you guys see that?" I said. Every single person said they had. At this point, most people would have driven off. I should have. But something in me needed to know what it was. I was always the skeptic. Ghosts, cryptids, whatever you name it, I'd laugh it off, so of course I did the dumbest thing I'd ever done. I got out the car. As soon as I stepped onto the gravel, it hit me how silent it was. No wind, no crickets, not even the rustle of trees in the distance, just dead silence. I stood there holding my phone like an idiot, trying to summon the courage to turn the flashlight on. The darkness in front of me was so thick, it felt like I could touch it. After a few seconds, I heard it. This faint crunch of leaves somewhere in the woods off to the right, not close, but not far either. I slowly raised my phone and clicked the light on. A weak beam of light cut into the trees, bouncing off the trunks and brush. I swept the light side to side, heart hammering in my throat. And that's when I saw it. An arm wrapped around the side of a tree. It wasn't like a person leaning out or hiding. This thing was just holding the tree. Long, pale fingers. The proportions were off. The elbow was bent too high and the fingers were too long. The hand twisted in a way that couldn't make sense. The skin was greyish looking, and it didn't fit right over the bone. I blinked, and it was gone. The flashlight shook in my hand. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked back to the car. I remember feeling like I was being watched the entire time, like if I broke into a sprint it would chase me. So I just kept my pace, got in and shut the door. No one said a thing. I began the car and drove fast as I could without wrecking on the gravel. And once I hit the paved road again, I kept going until we reached a gas station off the highway. We all got out, kind of numb. Finally, someone asked me what I saw. I didn't want to say it. Honestly, saying it made it feel more real, but I told them the truth. I saw an arm around the tree. It didn't look human. That was all I said. No one laughed. No one questioned it. We all stood there, pale and shaken. And the night ended. I dropped everyone off and went home, barely slept, and just lay there staring at my ceiling fan, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. To this day, we barely talk about it. If someone brings it up, it's in passing. None of us ever went back to that trail again. I'm not sure what we saw. I don't know what was out there watching us, but I know that when we drove into those woods, we brought curiosity and nerves. But something else was already there, waiting.
Alright, so I've decided to share this story in case anyone has had a similar experience. In the summer of 2023, I was camping with my family in Beaver Creek Campground in Montana for a few nights while visiting Yellowstone. The first night there was the most unsettling experience I have ever had. My mother, stepfather, and his brother had all gone to sleep around midnight, while I stayed up for about an hour by the fire. It was pitch black when I decided to snuff the fire and head to my tent to sleep. After about 20 minutes laying in my tent, I began to hear sniffing noises immediately outside my tent. Fearing it was a bear, I was frozen. This continued for a while, until I heard the familiar breathing and shaking noises of that of a dog. I relaxed, supposing a nearby camper's dog had wandered. I stopped hearing the dog after a while, but then I heard footsteps walking around our campsite and the sound of a large stick being dragged along the ground all around. Then I was frozen in fear again at the possibility of a stranger walking around our campsite in pitch darkness. Suddenly, an obvious camera flash had gone off right in front of my tent. Later, it felt as though an animal or person had laid down and cradled the corner of my tent. I felt a presence for about 5 minutes and kept feeling as if something was lightly fidgeting with the corners of the tent. Still frozen, I prayed for this to stop. But then, I was forced to make this person or whatever acknowledge my awareness of the situation when I sensed another's touch on the zipper of my tent door. I called out loudly, "Who's there?" My stepdad awoke and called out to me while I was too afraid to open my door. 10 seconds passed when I knew he was out of his tent with his gun. Then I emerged. However, there was nothing there, and after I called out, I didn't hear or sense any movement going away from the campsite. All the while, my mum and stepdad have a dog in their tent, which reacted to nothing the whole time. I slept in the car the next 2 nights, and nothing else happened. Anyone have any weird encounters like this in Montana, near Yellowstone, or in general? Thank you for listening to my story.
This happened when I was 13, though my friend and I only really understood the weight of it years later, when there was nothing we could do about it anymore. At the time, it felt more like just another weird story we'd laugh about, or use to freak each other out. But now, it's something that lingers in the back of my mind more often than I'd like to admit. I grew up in a valley surrounded by dense forest. Our street had maybe a dozen houses on it, and behind mine was this long wooded hill that stretched for miles, totally undeveloped back then. My best friend lived a few houses down, and we'd spend entire summer days hiking up through the woods, following trails we made ourselves, and if you kept going long enough, you'd eventually reach another neighborhood on the other side where there was a little farmstead. One of those roadside sheds that sold local honey, homemade jam, and bulk candy for next to nothing. Most days we'd make a trip out, hike there, buy some sweets, and spend the afternoon in the trees hanging out, trying to tell each other scary stories, silly kid stuff. But that day was the one that stuck with us. We were heading back home in the late afternoon, just as dusk was starting to settle in. We were maybe halfway down the hill when I saw something white poking through a patch of moss, almost glowing in the dim light. I was always looking for cool stuff in the woods, rocks, feathers, skulls, anything I could bring home and add to my little collection. So naturally I went straight over and started brushing the moss aside. That's when I pulled out a bone. Not a random shard or splinter. This was a full pelvis bone, and it wasn't fresh either. It was pockmarked and weathered, kind of discolored like it had been sitting there for a while. I remember staring at it for a second, unsure whether I should be freaked out or fascinated. I must have gone pale because my friend came over asking what I found, and I immediately blurted out that it must be a deer pelvis. I don't know why I said that. Part of me probably wanted it to be true. I needed it to be something harmless, and besides, at that age where pretending you knew something felt better than admitting you didn't. So we just stood there marveling at it, running our hands over the grooves and poking the dirt around it. I remember wondering if we should take it home, but I knew my dad would flip if I brought an old animal bone back to the house. We ended up tucking it back into the moss and covering it up like we'd found it and moved on. I didn't think about it for years. Life moved on, we got older, and eventually I moved away from that house. But sometime in my early 20s, I'm watching some forensic documentary, and they showed a diagram of human pelvic anatomy, and it hit me like a truck. I remembered that bone. Every curve of it, the size, the way it felt in my hands. The one I found all those years ago didn't look anything like a deer pelvis. It was unmistakably human. And even worse, it was small. Too small to belong to an adult. The realization made my stomach turn. Suddenly all these things I didn't think to question as a kid came rushing back. The way it was half buried, like maybe someone or something had once been buried there. The way we never saw any other bones lying around, like any animal might have left. And how quiet that part of the woods always was. I tried to go back a few times after that just to see if I could find the exact spot again. But the trails were overgrown, the woods had changed, and I never found it. Sometimes I wonder what we actually stumbled on that day. A missing person? Some poor kid no one ever found? I guess I'll never know. It's one of the things that still haunts me. A gnawing regret that we didn't tell anyone, that we might have been the only persons to see the last remains of whoever they were.
I've never been a big fan of camping. Circa 2012, for some reason or another, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property. We had permission from the owner, on the bank of a small lake in the rural American Southeast. The lake wasn't very large, probably only 50 to 150 yards across. It was more of a deep pond, but it was 5 times as long as it was wide, and from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization. We were 5 to 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. It definitely was not easy to access, however, and the only way in was a gated, narrow dirt road across a levee, which spanned one side of the lake. This road was gated and locked. The owner gave us his code and we pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. If you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of cities. Our cities are small and the rural population around often live rough and wild. We have dense woods, so thick that they're not worth building in unless you have some connection or attachment to the area. I've heard it was not profitable to cut roads through a lot of it when they were building highways in the 50s. So not much development has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places, since the Civil War. It's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come upon cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see stars and hear the sounds of nature. We were at our very utilitarian camp, small Coleman 2-person's tent and a blanket, simply looking around and enjoying the night, when suddenly my buddy sat up real straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sat up slightly and said, "Nah, it's just the dark playing tricks on you." He seemed actually shaken. "No, look, there's a bunch of faces behind the trees now." That got my attention, and I sat up fully, rubbing my eyes to try and gain full focus. And then I saw them. Small, round, white faces stared back at me from across the lake. Maybe 15 to 20 of them. All were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees, and only their heads were visible. The best way I can describe the faces is like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or high. We were too young for that. Not for at least a few more years. We had eaten dinner at home and were just planning on going to sleep after chilling out for a while. The faces weren't moving. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes would adjust and I would see that they were a reflection, bugs or owls or something. But I would never come to that realization. I just stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and then they were gone. Bodies of water carry sound extremely well, and we heard extensive shuffling from the other side of the lake, and a couple of small branches snap. It's incredible what your ears pick up on during an otherwise silent night. My buddy was tearing up a little when he said, "What the hell were those?" And I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well. I definitely felt validated in my feelings of disliking camping. But what were we going to do? I tried to do some research on the internet, but never found a phenomenon that could explain what we saw. One night, my mate and I were camping by a secluded lake on my private property, deep in the Australian bush. Surrounded by towering gum trees, I lived about 35 to 40 minutes from the nearest town. It was a chilly evening in July, and the branches of the gum trees overhead were swaying ominously in the breeze. My friend, who I'll call Jack, joined me for the night. As we relaxed at the campsite, enjoying a bit of weed in front of the campfire, I had an idea for a bit of fun. Since we were both really high, we decided to go for a wander through the bush. Bad part is, neither of us had brought a flashlight. So Jack and I ventured down a narrow path into the enveloping darkness of the bush. Jack was a few steps ahead of me when he suddenly froze. I started hearing strange, unsettling noises. As I turned to my left, Jack remained fixed, staring straight ahead. A faint sound, like a distant tinkling of a bell, but not exactly like that, filled the air. The noise grew louder and closer until it seemed to be right beside me. In a moment of fear, I let out a sharp gasp. Jack turned around, his expression filled with concern. "We should go back," he urged, his eyes wide with alarm. Back at the campsite, Jack finally revealed, "You want to know why I wanted to turn back?" Intrigued, I asked, "Why?" "I saw something. A huge, shadowy figure just behind one of the trees," he replied, his voice lowering to a whisper. Apparently, while I was preoccupied with eerie sounds, Jack had been transfixed by a dark, indistinct shape that seemed to lurk in the darkness for what felt like an eternity, until my gasp broke the spell.
Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Papa Scare for joining me in tonight's video. If of course you enjoyed, you can let me know, and if you'd like more from Papa Scare, feel free to follow the link in the description or on screen shortly to check out his channel. I'd like to extend a huge thank you as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their generous support and contribution. And if you would like to sign up to get some cool exclusive perks, including a shout out on your birthday, selecting the topic, and lots of other stuff, the link is there. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.